Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy met with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. in Manila.
Zelenskyy expressed his gratitude for the country's strong stance against the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its involvement in an upcoming peace summit. And joining us now to talk about this visit is Taras Kuzio, professor of political science at National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy. Hello, and thank you for joining us on TVP World.
Good evening. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, it's great to have you now with President Zelenskyy making his Asian tour, creating new alliances, trying to gather momentum for this upcoming peace summit. Do you think he achieved his goals there in the Philippines?
Well, I think it's probably too early to say, but I'm sure that the common ground in that President Zelenskyy was very critical of China's support for Russia, both providing military equipment to Russia and also trying to undermine the upcoming peace in Switzerland. And so many of the countries that are attending this summit also have very strong feelings and fears about China as well. So I think there's common ground there. Of course, it's early to say, but I mean, President Zelenskyy is trying to woo the so-called global South, or countries which have, many countries of which have been ambivalent in this war, have not, for example, supported sanctions against Russia. But there are plenty of countries, at least in East Asia, I think, who, at the very least, align with the West, such as Taiwan, South Korea, Singapore, maybe. And certainly Philippines is very, very, very worried about China.
Mm-hmm, certainly. Now, concerning China, one development that we see as of late, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been rather reluctant, and his administration, to really criticize China. They've been trying to, well, kind of walk a tightrope, if you will. But now, looking at what President Zelenskyy is saying as of late, that seems to have changed quite a bit. Do you think we're going to see more of an adverse stance towards China moving forward?
I think so, because primarily because Western countries have begun being more critical of China. It's not just Ukraine itself anymore. Again, typically, Great Britain, the United Kingdom, is the most radical. Just a few weeks ago, the British Defence Minister accused directly China of supplying military equipment to Russia and of being the main supplier, not Iran or North Korea, but China. It's the US, the Biden administration, typically, which is a bit weaker, and which try to argue, well, we don't have as much information as the British maybe on this question, who don't really want to, as it were, be as radical in criticizing China. So the Zelenskyy, at the very least, is going to be backed up by countries such as Britain, and what I tend to call the radical wing of Western support for Ukraine. So that's Poland, the Czech Republic, Baltic states, Scandinavian countries, and Britain. As opposed to the more weaker, shall we say, countries on both Russia and China, which is the Biden administration and Germany.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, when Secretary Antony Blinken was in China, he said that if China wasn't going to do something to stop supporting the war in Ukraine, well, the U.S. would do something about it. Do you think that was an empty threat, or is it a sign of things to come?
Well, they're going to probably impose some sanctions, but as we know, Western sanctions have been a bit of a joke against Russia. They haven't had the impact that everybody predicted. There's a lot of countries like Armenia, Georgia, and Central Asian countries, maybe some countries in the Middle East, Turkey again, which are acting as conduits to help Russia bypass Western sanctions. It's strange that the European Union has not, for example, imposed sanctions against Kyrgyzstan, and Armenia and Georgia, where trade has gone up massively, and we know that that's not for those countries. It's all going to Russia. So As for the United States, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, actually criticized the British after they came out openly and condemned China and said that the United States allegedly didn't have the same intelligence as Britain. So the United States is actually sending mixed messages, as they always seem to do, including on the right of Ukraine. Can they or can they not use U.S. weapons to fire into Russia? So sadly, the Biden administration is sending mixed signals as always.
And sending Kamala Harris and Jake Sullivan to the peace summit.
Well, actually, speaking of that, now President Zelenskyy hoped that more heads of states are going to come to that peace summit in Switzerland, which is going to take place 15th and 16th of June. Now, we also know that President of Philippines, I mean, here President Zelenskyy is thanking him. However, it is not sure whether he will come to that summit. So another head of state might miss this. Why do you think some of these heads of states are so reluctant to go?
Well, some of them certainly have are linked to China financially. I mean, there's a lot of duplicity and hypocrisy in many parts of this world. I mean, China is a country which has imprisoned 1 million of its Muslim Uyghur minority. Do you see much criticism from the Islamic world about this? No, hardly nothing at all. So I think there's a lot of hypocrisy. That's one reason. Maybe a second reason is that many countries don't want to offend Russia, maybe. There are some links there with Russia. For example, Russian oligarchs are very happy to be... they've been kicked out of the West, but they have a second home, as it were, now in Turkey, United Arab Republic, Dubai, and Israel. So there's those kinds of countries. There are many different reasons why that could be the case. Maybe the final reason would be that they don't see that this peace summit will lead to anything concrete. I mean, Russia's not going to attend, and of course, Russia, I don't believe, is going to suddenly tomorrow end its military aggression against Ukraine. That's only going to end on the battlefield.
Well, it wasn't invited, and they're really far apart on the 10-point peace plan and what Russia wants. I mean,
and also Beijing has stated it will not send representatives to Switzerland because Russia was not invited. Now, perhaps this is a controversial question, but when we talk about peace summits, you would think that two sides would be present. Was it a mistake not to invite Russia? I mean, we don't know if they would accept that invitation, but should that invitation actually go their way?
Well, you have to ask President Zelenskyy. I mean, I understand why he couldn't invite him, maybe for many reasons, including domestic reasons. I mean, the Chinese are the archetypical hypocrites here as well, because this is a country, China, which is steadfast in its demand to have respect for territorial integrity of states. And it really is tough on separatists in Tibet, in Chinese Turkestan, and on Taiwan. It really has a hard line on this. But on the case of Ukraine, it doesn't have a hard line. It supports Russia's territorial aggression.
I know, it's completely ironic. Actually, I've been asking that question all day to our guests, and I'm really glad that you pointed that out.
All right, so what should we expect
welcome to international relations hypocrisy.
So what should we expect from that summit then?
I think it's going to be more a lobbying meeting where what we have in effect is Ukraine, President Zelenskyy, Ukraine, competing with President Putin in the global south, in the, shall we say, non-aligned part of the world, for their support on these questions. And Russia's been very active there, because it's Russia's portraying itself, again, wrongly, as though it never was an imperialist power, which, of course, for Poles, Ukrainians and Balts and others is ludicrous. But that's how Russia portrays itself, because it continues the Soviet mythology that the colonialists were in the West and the Soviet Union is a friend of those countries which allegedly were oppressed by the West. So this is a continuation of Russia's program to try and spread this message in the global south, Ukraine is competing with that. And I think some Western countries will be happy that Ukraine is doing that because Russia's been quite successful, particularly in Africa, in drumming up support for itself.
Well, Taras Kuzio, Professor of Political Science, National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy, thank you very much for shedding light on the situation.
Thank you very much as well. Bye-bye.